Hello, sunshines. It's Maggie again. So this chapter we're going to be looking at the respiratory system. Let's look at the outline. So the sections of the textbook we're going to look through are structures of the respiratory system. So here we'll look at its functions. We'll look at the processes that go on here, and then we'll go organ by organ through and how they help out the respiratory system do its functions. Then we'll look at the mechanisms of breathing, how we force air in and out. We'll look at how gases move, oxygen and carbon dioxide diffusing. Then we'll look at how we control breathing using the respiratory centers in our brain. And then this chapter, I went pretty heavy on disorders. Especially in our current climate, it's an important section. Okay, so functions of the respiratory system. The whole point of the respiratory system is to take oxygen in and get it into your blood, and to take carbon dioxide out and excrete it, that waste product. So we need oxygen, we need to get rid of carbon dioxide. So that is our main function, but we also have to make sure that that air is filtered, warmed, and humidified before it gets to our lungs, right? There's a reason our lungs aren't just sitting on the outside getting oxygen, right? We want to have them protected, and we want to make sure they can't get infected very easily. Another interesting thing about carbon dioxide removal is the amount of carbon dioxide dissolved in our blood as carbonic acid helps determine our pH. So it's one of our pH buffers a little bit. So I'm going to put a star here. You can guarantee at least one test question on the processes of respiration. Okay. So the first process, breathing or ventilation, getting air in and out, moving air in and out. Oop, so sorry. Change my pen color. Next, we have external respiration. So external respiration is the gas exchange between the capillaries of our pulmonary circuit of blood flow and the air in our lungs. Okay, so next we have gas transport. Gas transport is moving oxygen, carbon dioxide through the blood. Moving in blood. Okay. And the last process is internal respiration. So this is going to be the gas exchange between our systemic capillaries and our body tissues. And then you can even add a fifth process, I'm sure you don't prefer it, but I do, of cellular respiration. So cellular respiration is using our mitochondria in our cells. What do? They make energy. So cellular respiration is taking in oxygen and sugar, doing all those processes we talked about with ATP production in the muscular system, and then making ATP, right? We use oxygen, make ATP, and we also make carbon dioxide, right? Okay. So I'm going to use another color. So you might be thinking to yourself, hey, the processes of respiration seem to involve a lot more than the respiratory system. And you're right, they do. The respiratory system is responsible for 1 and 2. Right? So what body system does the others? Cardiovascular system. right? So if I had space, I'd write cardiovascular system there. So respiration is actually done by the respiratory system and the cardiovascular system. Right? And the whole purpose is to get oxygen to our cells to make energy and get rid of that toxic byproduct CO2. Whole process of respiration. Get in oxygen, get CO2 out. So this is a lovely view, I'll move myself a little bit, of those processes occurring, right? Air moving in and out is pulmonary ventilation, or breathing. And then that oxygen comes in, the gases diffuse, oxygen into our blood, carbon dioxide leaves, we breathe it out. And then we transport those gases around the blood, so transport. And then we've got the gas exchange of the systemic circuit, where oxygen is diffusing into our body cells, and carbon dioxide is diffusing into the blood. Based on concentrations, everything's going to move from high to low with diffusion. Does that make sense? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and if we wanted to add 5, we could say those cells are doing cellular respiration to make ATP. Pretty, huh? I really like that. Okay. So let's look at the specific structures and how they help along this path to get oxygen and carbon dioxide out. So you've got two sections. You've got the upper nasal cavity, pharynx, and then you've got the lower, your voice box, your larynx, trachea, the branches, your lungs. And so this is a beautiful view of our upper and lower respiratory system. So like if you have an upper respiratory infection, it'll usually be in your nasal cavity, your sinuses, right? Okay. So first, let's start with the nose. So here we've got a cadaver view of the nasal cavity. There's a couple parts to the nose. There's the external nose that you can see, and then the internal nose with this large nasal cavity, right? So the most important functions of the nose: 1, it's an entry point for breathing, right? Air in, air, that's air. So now the air outside our body, it's cold, it's dry, it's full of dust, debris, and possible pathogens. So the nose is going to start doing all of the functions of our respiratory system until we get into where we're doing gas exchange. It's going to start filtering that air. You can see here, those nasal hairs we've got are called vibrissae, and those vibrissae are going to start catching large particles. So we're going to start filtering the air. You also have all of this mucous membrane. So right here are the nasal conchae, these folds, and those folds are going to help increase air turbulence. Basically, it's going to make it hit the membrane more. And what is that membrane covered with? Mucus. So dust, debris, pathogens, they're going to get caught on the mucus. And then you've got these lovely cilia who are moving in a wave-like motion the mucus across the surface, back, and then you'll swallow it, and you'll be able to have the stomach acid break down anything caught in there, right? You drink a couple cups of mucus a day from your nasal cavity and so forth. If you're sick, it's more. That's pretty fun. Okay, so the other things that we're doing here is we're going to start warming the air. Your nose is highly vascularized, right? There's a lot of blood vessels. If you get a bloody nose, it bleeds a lot. That extra blood flow there warms up the air. It's also going to give off some moisture, so it's going to humidify it. Warm and humidify air. It's also going to act as a resonating chamber for sound. So if your nose is plugged, your voice sounds different, right? It's because you're not getting that extra resonating chamber there. Resonating chamber for sound. And then last, let's change my color pen here. Right here, you've got what's called your olfactory epithelium. And in there are your olfactory receptors. And those olfactory receptors are going to be taking in information about smell, right? Remember that from special senses? Smell molecules dissolve in the mucus. They bind to the receptors on those olfactory receptors, and then they send the information up through the cribriform plate of your ethmoid bone to the olfactory bulb, down the olfactory tract into your brain, right? So, olfactory reception. Smell. And then I wanted to show, I'll move me up here for a second. So in this picture, I should use this. It shows healthy cilia, and then it shows cilia after they've been damaged by cigarette smoke. So anytime you're smoking, you're exposed to pollution in the air, it's going to break down your cilia. You're not going to be able to move your mucus as well. It'll stay there. You'll get more infections. Not ideal. And remember, these cilia, when they get cold, they don't work as well, which is why when you go outside in the cold, you'll get a runny nose because the mucus will just start dripping out. Interesting. Okay. So next we have the sinuses. So a sinus is a space. It's lined by the same mucous membrane as the nasal cavity. Navel. Oh, not quite. Nasal. Sinuses. Spaces lined with mucous membrane. Those are going to be inside some of our facial bones, and they're going to be named for the bones that they're in. Right? So between our eyes we have the ethmoid. In the front of our forehead we have the frontal, maxillary in our cheeks, and then the sphenoid will be more posterior, a little farther back in the sphenoid bone. So sinusitis imbalance if you have inflamed mucous membranes. Okay? So one of the problems with getting an upper respiratory infection is that these membranes inflame, you can get mucus trapped in there. And as long as we're moving mucus, as long as it's going back, we're swallowing it, it's great at getting rid of bacteria, things that get caught in there. But if the mucus can't move, now you've got this protein-rich fluid, right? And the protein is mucin. It's what makes mucus mucousy. And bacteria can eat it. They love it. They attack, right? If you have extra mucus in there, inflamed membranes, you might have pressure and pain associated. Lovely. Okay, so moving down our respiratory system, next we're going to get to the pharynx or pharynx. That's your throat. So your throat goes from the end of your nasal cavity past your oral mouth opening and then down behind the tongue. And it goes about here. And there's actually 3 sections of your throat. And they're named by the structures that they're by. So let's do those. So the most superior, highest up, behind your nasal cavity, is the nasopharynx. And let's go back a little bit farther. And then next, so this is your oral cavity here going back. So there's your oropharynx. You're going to have your tonsils embedded here. And then once we go past that, we're going to have to pause for the next video.